The Qajar dynasty emerged in the late 18th century, uniting Persia after years of fragmentation. Despite efforts to modernize, the Qajars struggled against European imperialism, losing territory to Russia and becoming economically dependent on Britain. Nasir al-Din Shah attempted reforms but faced resistance, leading to public unrest, exemplified by the 1890 tobacco protest. Growing dissatisfaction culminated in the 1906 constitutional revolution, establishing a parliament to limit monarchical power. Though met with opposition, the movement laid the foundation for future political reforms. The Qajar era shaped Persia's modernization and national identity but struggled to resist foreign domination. Let's travel to the history. After the fall of the Safavid dynasty, Persia went through a period of fragmentation and foreign invasions. By the late 18th century, the Qajar dynasty emerged, uniting Persia once again under a single rule. The Qajar era was marked by ambitious efforts to modernize Persia, countered by a struggle to maintain sovereignty in the face of European imperialism. The story of the Qajars is one of resilience, compromise, and the birth of a movement that would ultimately reshape Persia's political landscape, the Constitutional Revolution. By the mid-18th century, Persia was fractured, with competing factions and tribal leaders vying for power. The collapse of the Safavid Empire had left a power vacuum that led to political instability and invasions by neighboring powers. One of the most significant figures during this turbulent period was Nader Shah, a military genius who managed to temporarily restore order and expand Persian territory. However, after Nader Shah's assassination in 1747, Persia once again fell into chaos. Out of this anarchy, the Qajars, a Turkic tribe, emerged as the dominant power. Aga Muhammad Khan, the founder of the Qajar dynasty, was a shrewd and ruthless leader who managed to reunite Persia by defeating rival tribes and establishing Tehran as the new capital. In 1794, he crowned himself Shah, officially founding the Qajar dynasty. Although he was assassinated shortly after, his successors continued to consolidate Qajar rule over Persia, bringing a degree of stability to the nation after decades of upheaval. As the Qajars sought to modernize Persia and maintain control over their territory, they faced a growing challenge from European imperialism. During the 19th century, the British Empire and Imperial Russia were engaged in a rivalry known as the Great Game, a geopolitical struggle for influence in Central and South Asia. Persia, positioned between the British interests in India and Russian ambitions in Central Asia, became a key battleground in this struggle for dominance. The Qajars, who were dealing with internal challenges and limited resources, found themselves increasingly vulnerable to foreign intervention. Russia began to expand southward, encroaching on Persian territories in the Caucasus. In a series of wars in the early 19th century, Persia suffered defeats that led to the Treaty of Gulistan, 1813, and the Treaty of Turkmenchay, 1828. These treaties forced Persia to cede large parts of the Caucasus to Russia, weakening its territorial control and deepening public resentment toward foreign influence. Meanwhile, Britain sought to safeguard its interests in India and prevent Russian expansion towards the Persian Gulf. To this end, the British began exerting economic and political pressure on Persia, securing favorable trade agreements and offering loans in exchange for concessions. These concessions often came at a high cost to Persia, as the Qajar rulers were forced to grant foreign companies rights to exploit Persian resources, including oil, mining, and tobacco. Over time, the Persian economy became heavily dependent on foreign trade, with profits flowing primarily to British and Russian interests rather than benefiting the local population. Among the Qajar rulers, Nasir al-Din Shah, who reigned from 1848 to 1896, stands out as one of the most significant figures. He recognized Persia's need to modernize to counter foreign influence and strengthen his own rule. Inspired by European advancements, Nasir al-Din Shah attempted a series of reforms, including modernizing the military, establishing a postal system, and improving infrastructure. He encouraged Persian students to study in Europe and invited foreign advisors to help introduce new technologies and institutions. However, Nasir al-Din Shah's reforms were only partially successful. The efforts at modernization were hampered by limited resources, entrenched opposition from conservative religious leaders, and the Shah's own tendency to prioritize personal luxury over national welfare. Additionally, his modernization projects often required loans from European powers, which only deepened Persia's economic dependency. The Shah's concessions to foreign companies further fueled discontent. One infamous example was the 1890 tobacco concession, which granted a British company exclusive rights to buy, sell, and export Persian tobacco. This concession sparked widespread anger among Persian merchants and citizens, who saw it as an infringement on their economic freedom. The protest against the tobacco concession was so intense that it led to a nationwide boycott of tobacco, organized by merchants and religious leaders. This movement marked one of the first instances of mass political mobilization in Persia and forced Nasir al-Din Shah to cancel the concession, demonstrating the growing power of public dissent. Nasir al-Din Shah's assassination in 1896 left Persia in a state of unrest. His successor, Muzaffar al-Din Shah, faced mounting pressure from reformists, intellectuals, and religious leaders who demanded greater political rights and accountability. By the early 20th century, the call for reform reached a fever pitch, driven by growing frustration with government corruption, foreign influence, and economic mismanagement. In 1905, widespread protests erupted in Tehran, with demonstrators calling for a constitution and a national parliament, Majlis, to limit the power of the monarchy and ensure fair governance. Inspired by constitutional movements in Europe and the Ottoman Empire, Persian reformists argued that a constitutional government would protect Persia's sovereignty and enable it to stand on equal footing with other nations. The movement drew support from diverse groups, including merchants, intellectuals, and clerics, all of whom were united by a desire for political change. In 1906, facing intense public pressure, Muzaffar al-Din Shah reluctantly agreed to the demands and issued a decree for the establishment of a constitution. This historic event marked the beginning of the Persian constitutional revolution. The new constitution established a parliamentary system, enshrined civil rights, and limited the absolute power of the Shah. Persia's first national parliament, the Majlis, was inaugurated in 1906, symbolizing a new era of governance in Persia. However, the constitutional movement faced significant challenges. Conservative factions, including some religious leaders and aristocrats, opposed the reforms, fearing they would undermine traditional authority. The Russian Empire, wary of revolutionary movements near its borders, intervened militarily to support the Shah and suppress the Majlis. In 1908, Muhammad Ali Shah, the son of Muzaffar al-Din Shah, dissolved the Majlis and attempted to restore absolute monarchy with the support of Russian forces. Despite these setbacks, the constitutionalists regrouped and launched a counteroffensive, eventually restoring the Majlis in 1909. Muhammad Ali Shah was deposed, and Persia's constitutional movement continued, though the struggle for true democratic governance would persist throughout the 20th century. The constitutional revolution laid the groundwork for future political movements in Iran, instilling a sense of national identity and inspiring generations to fight for independence and justice. The Qajar era was a transformative period in Persian history, marked by both achievements and challenges. The Qajar rulers' efforts to modernize Persia were often undermined by foreign interference, economic dependence, and internal divisions. Yet, despite these obstacles, the period saw the beginnings of Persia's modernization and a growing awareness of national identity. The constitutional revolution represented a turning point, as it demonstrated the Persian people's desire for self-governance and an end to foreign domination. Although the Qajar dynasty ultimately failed to protect Persia from external pressures, it laid the foundation for a new era of political consciousness. The movement for a constitution and the establishment of the Majlis were powerful expressions of Persia's struggle to define its own destiny. The Qajar period also witnessed the beginning of Persia's oil industry, which would later play a central role in its economy and geopolitics. In 1908, oil was discovered in southwestern Persia, and the British soon secured a controlling interest in the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. This development intensified foreign interest in Persia, as oil became an increasingly valuable resource. Although the oil industry would bring economic opportunities, it also deepened Persia's dependency on foreign powers, setting the stage for future conflicts over control of its natural resources. The legacy of the Qajars is one of both ambition and constraint, a dynasty caught between tradition and modernization, and a nation struggling to assert its independence in a world dominated by imperial powers. As Persia transitioned into the 20th century, it carried forward the lessons of the Qajar era, striving for self-determination, reform, and national unity in the face of complex challenges. The constitutional revolution had planted the seeds of change, paving the way for the dramatic events that would shape Iran's modern history.